Yeah, we can start. Okay. All right, guys. We're gonna get started. This is part of our growth and conservation series. We started in February. Many of you came to the Stone Lodge where we had a little activity. This is the next part of that. So it's all incremental leading up to the code. So tonight what we're gonna do is it's gonna be a little bit of a bridge presentation. We know we can do a lot of presentation last year. So we're gonna talk a little bit about where we are in the project. Talk about that activity that we did in February and how that's starting to inform the growth and annotation policy for the city. And then think about how we make that into part of your top plan, your character areas, how that starts to inform your zoning. And then what are the tools that make this more real? Like, what are the next steps that need to happen to make this not just words talk about it? So as you know, this is a 4-part project. The connectivity plan is mostly done and we package it and send it. We're in the growth and conservation plan part. Next will be town center and then culminating our new code. So remember back in June last year, we had a meeting at the farmer's market. We did the online digital poll, and of the people who were there, we had about 50 people who responded to this digital survey. What component of the project is most important to me? And we had every part of the project, all 4 of these components in that survey. And the one thing that most people talk about is the metric. That is, where does growth occur? How does it occur? How can you get in front of it and control it and be the people who are in charge of it instead of letting it just happen in whatever way. And then the town center plan, everything, the mobility plan, the code was at the bottom of the list. Yeah. You know, it's not fun or sexy, but actually the code is what makes part of the growth management work. And so that's some of what we're going to talk about today. And then on Wednesday, we're going to talk more about zoning. And if you're a zoning nerd like me, you want to be there, or you are not, and you just want to know about this stuff and learn, we're going to talk more about that. So I'm going to hand it off to Vanessa to
everybody. Okay, so we want to talk about what should growth look like. We've talked a little bit about that in February. We're going to do a short recap and then go into additional detail. And then after the presentation, there's also additional detail on the board, so we'll be out there to chat with you guys and answer any of those questions. So when we're thinking about growth management, we need to think about what we want the character of that growth to look like, and at the same time, when we think about what is conservation, what are the areas that should not be called out for growth. What is that? So to start, we want to understand your town character. You have your main street, you have the town center, and you have the residential areas. So these are the built, the developed areas of your town that fit within the character of what we've been told is what you all know, right? The small town feel of the town. But recently, there has been larger scale development that has a different character and different scale. Now, many people are very happy that there's a grocery store, that there's a Publix, but the scale of it and the context of it is very different from the context of the store in town. So we're trying to balance how can we manage this growth that is coming. You've seen it coming. Property owners have certain rights, but the city and the community still has certain rights in shaping what that means. And then when it comes to large residential developments, a lot of the time what you're seeing is what's on the left, where you're clear cutting everything and then just starting from the ground up. So you don't have any of that natural environment. You're not looking around the natural environment. So those are the things that we're thinking about this, what you told us that you like, and some of the concerns that you have And how can we balance those two things? And one way to do that is to have very defined character areas. We'll talk about the policy part of that a little bit later, but I'll just explain conceptually what the character areas are. During our workshop in February, we discussed the character areas, and we also had Georgia Conservancy, where they're here with us today, talk about how can we have a more analytical view of what areas are important for conservation. So not everything is going to be preserved for natural lands, but some things are going to be more important ecologically than others. And so we'll walk through those areas as well, and we have that fun. So when we're thinking about the developed areas, we've come up with 3 different character areas. The neighborhood, those are your typical single family dwellings, lower density neighborhoods that you're more familiar with. That can be from a smaller single family lot or a duplex to a larger lot. And then a village, which would be more similar to the gym property. It can include and does include everything in the neighborhood as well, but it has a little bit of higher density with townhouses and potentially small retail. And then you have your town center. So that is like your main street. And this is a gradient. So you're getting from less dense to more compact. And these are the 3 types of development areas that we're talking about. And then in the back later, you can see we have for each one what those different building typologies that we feel like are appropriate given the small town character of Senoia will be appropriate for that. And later on, we'll develop that into zoning districts. Wednesday, they're very specific with the parameters, the dimensions, how it's located on the site, so that the character and the aesthetic is maintained as opposed to some of these larger scale developments that are really set back from the street and more auto-centric. And so looking at the neighborhood, this is an illustration of what a neighborhood could look like. This is not set in any particular location, but it's just to give you an idea of these spots with single family neighborhoods. You can have larger homes, you can have cottages, complexes, but generally the massing of all of these buildings are going to fit within the massing of what you understand to be something very similar to the historic residential district. In a village, you still have all of these houses as well, but you have an additional little bit of more compact density. You potentially have blocks, and we have townhomes, and we have some retail that's going to be serving the neighborhood. And then you have the town that goes up in scale a little bit more to your town center. And so we want to have these different areas defined so that when we're looking later into the policy, we know we can say, okay, well, this part is an appropriate for the town center. The town center can expand to geographically. This area should be just a neighborhood. So if this gets developed in the future, it should look like this. So it's very predictable for you all, the developer, and everyone. But we also want to have 2 other character areas that are more geared toward conservation. So we have conservation, which is going to be your forest, creeks, wetlands, floodplains, and then the rural, so farmsteads, estate lots, these things that you speak to the small town character as well. They're just as important to having your character areas map and your zoning map, so that you're not only planning for growth, but you're also planning for conservation. And this is an example of what it could look like. I know there has been mixed feelings about this is Chattahoochee, but it's not too far from here. But I think this area was a really great example of a way where you can have a ton of preserved natural forested area, you have areas you can see, and then the development is clustered together so that you actually allow for a lot of undisturbed land to keep the character that we are looking for. Okay, so where should each of these things take place? Georgia Conservancy in February went through this methodology, and they'd be able to speak on it in detail, but I'll just go over it very quickly. You all, that's looking at different layers of what's important for conservation, and they're scored and weighted based on what's most important. So there's analysis for the tree canopy, your hydrology, that's your wetlands, your creeks, habitats, and then what's not developed yet, and for slope. And so with slope, anything that's a very steep slope is going to be more difficult to develop. It doesn't necessarily mean that that land is best for conservation, but if added with all these other things, then it'd be a pretty good candidate. And then for development, this starts to tell us where could growth happen, but there might be some of those areas that could have growth in the future where we're going to say, actually, it's more important because of these other categories that this be prioritized for conservation. So on the left, you have everything that is in this salmon color for areas just outside of the city. As your city has been growing in and annexing different properties, we want to look beyond the existing city limits. And so this is a 3-mile radius, this is a 5-mile radius, so not too far. These are areas that could be redeveloped in the future. And then on the right, we have the analysis that Georgia Conservancy did that has the high ecological value. So these are the parcels that we're saying these have a lot of value from a conservation perspective, and you can tell that there's a lot of overlap between them. It's not all of them, but there is a good bit of overlap. And you will have some maps here that start to tease out, okay, how do we actually put them together that say can happen anywhere conservation. And we'll review more of that on Wednesday once we get some more feedback after speaking with you all today.
And an important note on some of the maps you might have seen in this one, the map that we've been using. It kind of starts to take together this information, and we put together all the large property owners, land that is not disturbed or has high ecological value, land that is agricultural, and start to identify the world of what is possible right now for development without us being involved or any of this. And when we met in February, we said there's a certain number of units that are out there, just floating around there, as right. That's the map that starts to explain how we understand that. And it's a little bit of a scary map, I'm not gonna lie. It doesn't your town with a certain amount of development if it all happens in the manner that it's allowed to under county law right now. So all of what we're doing, just to bring it back and to help bring that into a more useful form for the town, both through the zoning and through stuff that happens outside of it.
Okay, so you kind of talk about that. Let's get this slide.
The reason it's important is we did not exercise in asking you all where should you put all that work. And so the work that we do this week is
from the workshop in February and this mapping activity that we did with you all, we have this preliminary diagram. We're going to be working on it on Wednesday once we refine a little bit more, but it has all the analysis just talk about, but also through the lens of the goals that you told us about. So aligning with community, you have very in mind in this green here, the trail network that we proposed for mobility chart that we did earlier. And so it's important to align anywhere that's going to have density with accessibility to different modes of transportation to help with traffic congestion. And then also preserving ecological land. So here we've highlighted land and wetlands to try and create a sort of a green belt on the region that's going to maintain the character that we all want, but then still allows areas that could have some development. And the scale of that development is also something that we can talk about in the next couple of minutes. Okay, so how can we actually make these ideas feasible, and that's through policy. So this slide has a lot of stuff on touch base on a couple of them. The two biggest policy documents that you have is the development plan and your code. So the comprehensive development plan is updated in 2021. It's updated every 5 years, and we are just refining a couple of the ideas that already included in that plan to be slightly more specific. And then with the code, as Tony mentioned earlier, one of our deliverables is to take the code and turn it into a unified development ordinance, which just makes it a lot more cohesive. And on Wednesday, we're going to have it here. presenting on exactly what that means and how those pieces work together from a policy perspective. And so what we've just talked about is the content is going to go into the annexation policies, looking beyond the city limits. That's going to be part of the annexation policy, which is included in your policy development plans. So be updating that, as well as the character areas, which we just talked about. It's also part of your comp plan. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the character areas map. And so we're taking the character areas and actually putting them where those should go. And that relates to your zoning code as well, which we'll explain on Wednesday. And then the last part of this presentation is going to be about the subdivision ordinance. It's a little bit more technical, but I think it's very important for you all to understand. Right now, each of your zoning categories, your zoning districts, have different rules about how a large parcel can be subdivided within that district. And what we want to do is actually make a separate subdivision ordinance so that any large scale development follows the same rules in the district. And it's going through a master planning process. And so we're setting up some of the parameters of how that can happen and how we can incorporate conservation into that. And that's all through. So we've talked about these conservation corridors in February, and that's really this part of this area as an example. Area that is untouched. There are large swaths of land. They have important habitat properties, different conservation properties that are only available when you have large pieces of land together. But in addition to that, within each development, we also want to be able to have areas that are smaller preservation areas and have rural character, canopy, trees, and things like that. And so the subdivision ordinance, when a developer owns large property, is going to tell them, okay, this is how you can actually subdivide and break up this large parcel in order to have the development that you were by law allowed to have, but also you're going to be giving us these things like conservation.
And right now, it happens. Somebody comes in with an application, they want to rezone it all one thing, and then staff does their best to negotiate the investment. Right? The other way of doing it, we're setting in here, is a chapter of the code that says this is what everybody has to do. So it takes some of the negotiation out of it, because you have to provide roads and structure. You have to install X%.
So right now, the majority of your land that is zoned for residential is either R40 or R40, and they have very similar density maximums that a developer can use. So R40 is 1 unit per acre, R40 is 0.9 units per acre. We're going to go with this exercise just 1 unit per acre. Mistake of the exercise, but here 1 acre in a rural lot, a house on a big lot. That lot might have a creek on it and different things. But in the way that development happens today, 1 acre in a suburban lot is actually just everything that was inside and putting a house in. So that's what we don't want to happen. And one way to address that is to keep the density 1 unit per acre, but actually give a lot more variation in the lot size so that the lot can be smaller and the rest of the site can be used for purposes. So that's what this is showing here. So this is showing a 50 feet by 150 foot lot, a single family lot that fits in 1 acre. We only have 1 lot for the acre, but the rest of the acre can be preserved. And so here in this diagram, we're disturbing 17% of the lot and preserving 83%. And so we think that a 75% preservation requirement could be reasonable for future development. So how would that work? We're going to use Fieldstone as an example. Yes. Yeah. So no one is saying anything about Fieldstone. We're just using it as an example because it's easier for us to understand something that you are familiar with. So this is an aerial image of Fieldstone 16 here from 2023. As you can see before, it had a lot of canopy and some fields and some existing roads. And so if we were to redevelop Fieldstone, same density, 1 unit per acre, using the character areas and the compact development ideas that we've been talking about, this is what it would look like on the right. So on the left is what it looks like now when it's actually built. You're preserving less than 40% of the site, and what you are preserving is spread out everywhere in a way that doesn't have as much conservation value. And so here we're clustering the development. You have a little bit, not as many units, 220 versus 288, but you're preserving 75% of the site, and you're still maintaining the character of a neighborhood, which we did before. So all of this is within these typologies. It's not really increasing. It's not going really tall or anything that would be out of scale over time. It's just making sure that the parcels are smaller, they're better connected. We actually have a park here, so there's some civic space involved as well. So that's 75% of the site. Another option, if you wanted to have some parcels that were a little bit larger, more like estate lots, you could preserve 50% of the site, and that's still more than we have today. And it's also clustered, so the areas that are preserved have high ecological value for that reason. And in this scenario, we would also talk about offset conservation. And so if the requirement is to preserve 75%, you can preserve 50%, and then you have to preserve 25% else. And what does that mean? That would be offsite conservation. And so let's take this development. They're preserving 50% of the site. Requirement is 75. So they're actually taking 25% from somewhere else. And so you're removing the development of another property and saying this property is not going to be developed ever because we move those units to this petition's fieldstone right here. And so that's another way that we can start to think about these large conservation forests, how we can actually feasibly protect them is by taking the units that would have been developed there and putting them in other places, but these other places still have conservation requirements for monitoring area. And so if we were to do that and say, okay, we're going to take additional units from somewhere else and put it in this parcel, we'll make it into a village. We'll have a little bit more units in there. So that's what that means. We can still preserve 50% of the site. You would have 420 units, 238 units. And then you actually have to preserve every unit that you put in, you have to preserve an acre somewhere else. So even though on site you're preserving about 100 acres, elsewhere in the region you're preserving 265 acres. And so all of this regulation is going to go into the subdivision ordinance that would be part of the unit. This diagram is just showing the breakdown of all of that. I won't go through this in detail, but just so you all are aware, there's all this math and different, and we'll upload this as well to the website. So take a look at that.
And you remember in February, we talked about the tools, the conservation tools. Georgia Conservancy listed a bunch of them. One of them that we talked about was the TDRs. We're going to buy units from over here and take them over here. This is a different way of accomplishing that goal in parallel. This one, okay. Let's say I am a developer of fields, and I own this parcel, I own this parcel, I own this parcel. And the ordinance says that I get 200 units as a right. But if I donate some of my other land to the city, I'll get a bump in my density. And that's the way you preserve and start to piece together this green belt without anybody having to pay for it, and without the city having to pay on their part of tracking the TDRs. Because that was part of the sort of complication with TDRs is that the city has to maintain a ledger and track who's sending to where. In this case, the city gets ownership of that as a piece of land, and over time, you create this green belt of the city. Versus what happens now is that the developer comes in, negotiates for this piece, they're allowed 200 units as of right, and then it's like, well, we need a new road over here. Get 50 more units, and we want to do this over here. There's no predictability there, and there's no actual market units where you can start to do this in an organized way, which is what we're trying to do here. So the trade-off is it's going to be for everybody to understand that scary amount back there. To be able to conserve all of that land, we're going to have density in pockets of the town. either within town or within areas that are outside of town that we bring into town. And that's the big area problem in the room, that we all have to like determine, make a decision, do it or you don't. Yeah, Tony?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that conservation area that's outlined in black, it's owned by the same, hopefully it's owned by the same.
It's owned by the same developer, yes.
So in other words, he gets to develop the same amount, but putting it on one parcel.
Right.
And so you don't have to mobilize and develop another part. So
Correct.
we're not really losing anything. Our objective to develop that at X density, this at X density, and now you do one of them at plus density.
So you're not creating additional to that. It's already.
Could be the city, that's the question, is who's the entity that is responsible here? Could be addressed. That's correct, correct.
Yeah, I mean, Philstone was very wooded. And I've been there over 5 years. So when they started cutting other trees, I just started taking down every tree that there was. I mean, if you don't do something to these people that come in and clear cut and take everything down, it's not going to serve any purpose.
Well, but the code.
Well, some needs to be that. I mean, I'm angry at the builder for it may be, they could have left the backyard with some trees.
Right.
A lot of people, I happen to have a few trees in my chance, but a lot of people have no trees and they would plant 2 trees in the front yard. But because I had pines in the backyard, they didn't give me any trees in the front yards. It just shows you, you know, where the mindset is. But if you don't do something about them, clear cutting on the subdivision, when they've got trees, they can work.
So that's why the subdivision board is so important, because it's at that step that you decide, you know, the fuel spill is probably a multi-phase process, but if we have a clear picture of what the end result is getting, then you have better. And if you're only developing a geographically smaller portion of the site, you don't have a reason to clear cut. And then we also have the tree ordinance that's being worked on now, that's going to help with that as well, particularly for things like that. So all of the different policies together in order to.
Yeah. But see, I'm looking at acres. So if you're pushing it down, that looks to me like at best would be on the quarter acre, which means your neighbors would be this far from you.
Yeah.
Me personally, I don't.
But that's the trade-off, that's the trade-off, but that's the trade-off, it's with the majority of the law. But the thing is that it's not a one size fits all, so there is a range of building, right? And they all shouldn't be, we would call that the state, 1 acre or half acre. Yeah, no, I know, and then no, like, you're of very zoning, but, there is a range. There should be a greater variety where there are half acres, there should be some acre. Those are the ones those are the premium lots, right? And they all have different price points and value, you know, a range of people living in the neighborhood, different points in their lives. Somebody who is, 30 years old doesn't need to be in an acre, right? Unless they can afford it. But, these smaller units, if they go for a smaller amount of money, they can, the young families, for example. So it's about having a range.
And part of the trade-off is that not everyone is now, that's what you're saying. But even with this, not everyone's going to have it. However, if you live over here, you can walk a block and you can be in a trail to the forest. Right? So we're still making the nature. In order to do that, you have to be able to preserve it.
The other thing I was going to, that is going to be part of the subdivision is notice the civic space. Right now, when the city of which you the developer, they say we need civic spaces. And what we get out of it, generally, are the areas that are left over. The city doesn't have the tools right now to be able to negotiate in good faith over the design, the specific design, without having some regulation that says the civic space should be a civic space where buildings front that space, that's usable, that's not just the leftover abandoned house. Like this, right? And that's a square, It's a normal type of civics. But all of this gets built into the subdivision remains as a chapter.
Okay, come back on Wednesday. We are going to now just break and our team will be able to do these drawings, and specific questions. And then based on this feedback and meetings that we're having with different stakeholders tomorrow, we're going to be refining these maps that are going to be the character areas map, or zoning map, and the annexation policy map. And that is gonna be reviewed Wednesday, in updated version. So come back on Wednesday and then.
And a little bit about the station. That is the Georgia conformity analysis. It's a lot of stuff that we should create in February, but now it's gonna take a closer look at. Here in the middle, it's the proposed character areas that we just discussed, and then some examples of the initial analysis on the code. So how does that actually become law? That there's a long piece of paper over there. That's your list of uses that exists in the code right now. It's a long notice that there's uses like hobby shop. Or there's like a lot of overlapping. And then over here in this corner, this is called a synoptic survey. As part of the code creation, we looked at some of your heritage buildings and looked at setbacks, side setbacks, front setbacks. What does the frontage look like? Is it a front porch? Is it a stoop? And then the lot widths as well. That helps inform what the code is. Rather than us just plopping down whatever looks from Miami or Brooklyn or wherever, we look at where you are right now, what was historically built here, and design the code around that, because obviously it works. It's what draws people here in the first place. And then there's the scary ownership and potential development. Yes.
Just all the uses. The trend has been like to focus less on the uses or the impacts of the look. Is that what?
Yeah.
Y'all are doing?
That's right. That's right. It's about how the building fits on the lot and less so on what happens inside. That does not mean that we don't look at what's inside. It's just not the first thing. And you'll see, I've started to go through there and consolidate. You know, there's like 15 different categories that are not just, they're just, yeah, hobby shops or souvenir shops. Why are we? It's just retail. So what happens is over time, council makes a decision for some reason, there's a reason that things happen, but now is the moment where we can consolidate. Also, your code, we didn't mention it, just so you know, it lives in like 10 different chapters of your overall city ordinance. So we've gone through the entire code and picked out everything that has to do with land development and zoning. And we're gonna take it all and put it into one chapter. Predictability for you and for staff and for the development. And just to take those things. So that's it for tonight. And we'll be on